The clanging started about 40 miles south of Rachel. I'd been on the extraterrestrial highway for hours, running a load north out of Vegas toward Tonopah, and the road was doing what it always does out there. Just going. Straight and empty and shimmering with heat even though the sun was getting low. Nothing in the mirrors. Nothing ahead. The kind of stretch where you set your cruise and let your hands go soft on the wheel and your mind drifts off somewhere it shouldn't. The sound came from underneath the trailer. Heavy. Metallic. Like a wrench ringing off an axle over and over on a beat that felt too steady to be mechanical. I turned the radio down. Listened. The clanging kept going, precise as a metronome, loud enough to cut through the engine and the wind both. I picked up the silver coin from my cup holder and started flicking it with my thumb, the way I do on long empty stretches when something doesn't sit right. I've had that coin since I was 23. Found it in a truck stop parking lot in Utah. No idea what it's worth. It's just a thing I carry. I told myself it was a heat shield. A loose brake line bracket rattling against the frame. Metal expands in the desert and things work loose and you get sounds that don't mean anything. I've heard it 100 times. The thing that got me wasn't the sound. It was that the clanging stopped the second I touched the brakes. Now, for anyone who hasn't driven the 375, I should explain something. The extraterrestrial highway is roughly 98 miles of two-lane blacktop cutting through the Nevada desert, and for most of that distance there is absolutely nothing. No gas stations. No cell service. No towns except Rachel, which has maybe 50 people and a cafe that's open when it's open. You drive it because it's the route, and you don't stop because there's nowhere to stop. If your rig breaks down out there, you're looking at a long, hot walk and a longer wait. I'd been driving hauls like this for about 12 years. Local and regional mostly, but this was a longer run than I usually take. The regular long-haul guy was out sick and the company had a deadline, so I said sure. I had my old gray zip-up balled up on the passenger seat, the one I've had since I started driving, and a half-warm bottle of store-brand energy drink in the door pocket because I forgot to grab coffee at the yard. My logbook was current. My hours were fine. It was just another run. The desert out there smells like dry sagebrush and baked dust, and the wind comes through the rock formations and makes a sound like someone whistling through their teeth. Except when it doesn't. Except when it goes dead quiet and the silence gets so heavy it feels like pressure against your eardrums. Like the whole landscape is holding its breath. The clanging had stopped when I braked, so I figured whatever was loose had settled. But something about it didn't sit right. The timing. The steadiness. I've heard loose brackets rattle plenty of times, and they don't keep a beat. They clatter random. This was measured. I pulled onto the shoulder. Cut the engine. The silence that followed was the kind you only get in the middle of nowhere, where there's nothing generating sound for 50 miles in any direction. Just the tick of the engine cooling and my own breathing. The heat coming off the ground was still intense, like stepping into an oven someone had just turned off. I grabbed my flashlight from behind the seat and stepped down onto the asphalt. Walked around the back of the trailer, running the light along the undercarriage, looking for anything obvious. That's when I saw the boots. Steel-toed boots, heavy, rusted at the eyelets, wedged behind my rear dual tires. Not moving, just sitting there, attached to legs that extended up into the shadow of the trailer. I stopped. My flashlight beam sat on those boots for what felt like a long time. My brain did what brains do. It reached for the explanation that made the least trouble. Somebody stowed away. A hitchhiker climbed up at the last stop and is hiding under the trailer. Dangerous and stupid, but it happens. People do desperate things. I crouched down and aimed the light deeper under the trailer. The legs went back about 4 feet, disappearing into the dark between the axles. They weren't moving. I called out, told whoever it was to come out from under there. Nothing. I reached for my phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. This is the 375. I set the phone on the running board and got down on my hands and knees, shining the light underneath. The boots were attached to a man. He was lying on his back in the alkali dust, wedged between the trailer crossmember and the ground, and his face was turned toward me. My flashlight hit him full in the eyes and they were wide open. Not blinking, not squinting against the light, just wide, like a person who'd been waiting and was glad the waiting was over. I scrambled back. My elbows hit the asphalt and I pushed myself away from the trailer on my back, not taking my eyes off the space underneath. My heart was hammering and my mouth had gone completely dry. That cotton feeling you get when your body knows something before your brain catches up. A man slid out from the opposite side of the trailer. He came around the front corner on my left, moving slow, and he was covered in white alkali dust. His jacket, his pants, his hair, like he'd been lying in the dirt for a long time. He didn't look at me the way a person looks at another person. He looked at me the way you look at a tool you need to use. I stood up. He reached into his jacket. I know what you're thinking. I should have run right then. And you're probably right. But in the moment, your brain tries everything it can to keep things normal. I told myself he was reaching for a lighter. A phone. Maybe he was just a guy who needed help and was showing me he wasn't armed. That's what I told myself. Right up until his hand came out holding a piece of metal that had been sharpened against glass. It caught the last of the light and I could see the edge on it. He didn't say a word. He just raised it and started toward me. I backed toward the cab. He matched my pace, walking slow, slashing the air in front of him with that shard like he was testing the weight of it. The wind had picked up again, whistling through the rock formations, and I could hear it building. Then I looked down at my driver's side rear tires. The lug nuts were finger loose. 5 of them, maybe 6, backed off nearly to the end of their threads. I could see the studs catching the light. He'd been under there long enough to loosen them by hand. He wasn't trying to rob me. He was trying to strand me. Another few miles at highway speed, and that wheel would have come off, and I'd have been sitting in the middle of the desert with a rig I couldn't move and no phone signal and a man with a sharpened piece of metal walking toward me from behind. That's when the fear hit my legs. Not my mind. My legs. They went weak, the way they do when you've been crouching too long and the blood drains out, except I was standing. I turned and ran for the cab. The man moved faster than I expected. I heard his boots on the asphalt behind me, the crunch of the gravel shoulder, and I threw myself at the driver's side door, yanked it open, and dove in. I slammed the lock down with my palm and reached for the ignition. He hit the door. The whole truck rocked. His body came against the door so hard I felt it in the steering wheel, a vibration that traveled through the frame and the seat and my hands. I could hear his fingernails on the paint, a high scraping sound, like a dog trying to dig through a screen door. The engine turned over. I slammed it into gear. He hit the door again. The window didn't break, but I could see his hand flat against the glass, pressed white, the knuckles bent backward. And then the wind stopped. Right then, mid-struggle, the whistling through the rocks just quit. The silence was so total it made the struggle feel like we were in a closed room instead of 50 miles of open desert. Just his breathing and the engine and his nails on the paint and nothing else. I let out the clutch. The truck lurched forward and he fell away. I felt the rear tire catch something, a bump, a weight, and I didn't look in the mirror. I got the rig up to 30, then 40, then 50, and the whole driver's side was shaking because the lug nuts were still loose on that rear wheel. I drove, both hands locked on the wheel, the loose wheel wobbling underneath me, making a grinding rhythmic thump I could feel in my teeth. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't check the cargo. Didn't care. The load was someone else's problem now. I watched the mirror and I watched the road and I watched for any shape coming up behind me in the dust. The rim held. I don't know how. The wheel stayed on by what must have been 2 or 3 threads of lug nut, and I limped that rig into Tonopah at about 40 miles an hour, pulling into the first service station with my hazards on. I told the mechanic the lug nuts had worked loose on a desert run. I didn't mention the man. What was I going to say? Some guy was hiding under my trailer in the middle of the extraterrestrial highway trying to kill me? They'd have looked at me like I'd been out in the sun too long. Maybe I had been. They replaced the wheel. Retorqued everything. I checked every bolt on that rig myself before I drove it out of the lot. The door had 4 deep gouges in the paint from his fingernails. I didn't fix those. I left them. That was about 3 years ago. I haven't taken the 375 since. I've turned down every run that goes through Lincoln County, and my dispatcher knows not to ask. I still flinch when I hear a rattling sound while I'm driving. Something loose in the trailer, a chain shifting, anything metallic and rhythmic, and my hands tighten up on the wheel before I can stop them. The thing I keep coming back to is the patience of it. He lay down in the dirt under a trailer that could have moved at any second, and he loosened those lug nuts by hand. That's not impulse. That's planning. He chose that stretch of road because there's nothing out there. No cell service. No witnesses. No one coming for hours. I don't know if he was going to kill me. Maybe he just wanted me stuck. Maybe he wanted the cargo. Maybe he wanted something worse, and a stranded trucker in the middle of nowhere was easier than whatever else he had planned. But I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't pulled over when I did. If I'd driven another 10 miles at full speed and that wheel had come off on the highway. I'd have been sitting in the dark, in the silence, with no way to call anyone, and a man who'd been patient enough to loosen my lug nuts by hand walking toward me from the direction I'd come from. I still have the silver coin. I don't flick it anymore. The next one comes from a woman who spent years driving loads she never asked about, and the moment she finally looked. Story 2. I want to be clear about something before I start. I'm not asking for sympathy. I knew what I was doing. Maybe not all of it, not the full shape of it, but enough. Enough to keep driving and enough to keep my mouth shut. And if you hear this and think I should have done more, you're right. I know that. I've known that for a while now. The yard was just outside Henderson, right on the line where Clark County turns into nothing. Big place. High fences. Automated cranes that ran on tracks and made this grinding sound 24 hours a day, like teeth on teeth. The air smelled like scorched rubber and ozone, that burnt electrical smell that gets into your clothes and stays there even after you wash them. Everything was concrete and floodlights and sensors that beeped when you walked past them. Sterile. That's the word. The whole place felt sterile, like it had been cleaned of something that wasn't dirt. I'd been hauling freight for the better part of 30 years. Started when I was 22, hauling produce out of California, and I worked my way up to the long contracts. The kind where a firm calls you, gives you a route and a seal number, and you don't ask questions. Sensitive equipment, they called it. Never a name on the manifest beyond a code. High pay, no talk, and for a long time that was fine by me. I carried a brass key ring on my belt. Came from a logistics terminal in Reno that got demolished back in the 90s. I worked there for a summer and kept the keys when they tore the building down. No reason. Just a piece of something that used to exist. I jingled them when I was stressed, which I guess was more often than I realized, because my husband used to say I wore a groove in his patience with all that jangling. The first thing that didn't sit right was a container. I was doing my walk-around before a haul, checking the seals and the locks, and I noticed a patch on one of the containers. Freshly welded. A square about the size of a dinner plate low on the side panel, and the weld bead was rough. Not factory rough. Hand rough, like somebody had cut a hole from the inside and then someone else had come along and sealed it back up. The metal around the patch was discolored, darker, like it had been heated and cooled in a hurry. I told myself it was a repair. Some terminal along the route had a container come open in transit, whether damage or a forklift accident, and they patched it. Poorly. That happens. Not every yard has a certified welder on staff. You get patch jobs that look ugly but hold fine. I signed the manifest. I drove. The scratching started about 3 weeks in. I was on a haul heading north from the yard. Empty highway, middle of the night. The trailer was sealed, same as always, and I was running about 60 on a flat stretch when I heard it. Soft, rhythmic, like fingernails on the inside of the wall, right behind my cab. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Then tap, tap, tap again. I turned the radio up, told myself it was the metal. Trailer walls expand in the desert heat and contract when the air cools at night, and they make sounds. Pops, creaks, sometimes a scratching when two panels rub. I've heard it 1,000 times. It's nothing. The scratching stopped after about 20 minutes. I didn't think about it again until the next haul, when it started up in the same spot. Same rhythm. Same pauses. I told myself the same thing. Metal expanding. Air temperature differential. That's all. But I started jingling my keys more after that. The routes got more frequent. 3 a week, then 4. Always the same pattern. Pick up at the Henderson yard. Drive to a drop-off in the middle of nowhere. No receiver facility. No warehouse. Just a GPS coordinate and a time window. I'd pull up, unhook the trailer, and leave it sitting in the desert. Sometimes there'd be another truck already there, picking up a different container. We never talked. Not once. That was just how it worked. I told myself that was normal. Plenty of operations run like that. Sensitive equipment, remote sites, no need for small talk. The pay was good. Better than good. I was making more in a month than I used to make in 3, and I'd gotten used to that. That's the thing about money. It doesn't make you stop asking questions. It just makes the questions feel less important. One night, the tapping changed. It had been scratching for weeks, and then it wasn't scratching anymore. It was slower, steadier. A soft, muffled thump against the trailer wall, about once a second. Like something pressing against the metal from the inside. Like a heartbeat. I drove with it for an hour. I turned the radio up, then off, then up again. The thumping didn't change. Once a second. Steady. I told myself it was a pump. Some kind of hydraulic equipment in the cargo cycling. That's what I told myself. I was still telling myself that when I pulled into the drop-off and unhooked the trailer and drove away, and the thumping stopped the second the trailer disconnected from the cab. A few days later, I was walking back to the yard office to sign out after a route, and I saw something on the asphalt of the loading dock. A shoe. A small one. A child's shoe, brown leather, the kind with the Velcro strap. It was sitting right by the edge of the dock, like it had fallen out of something. I picked it up, turned it over. It was worn. The Velcro was still sticky. This wasn't something that had been sitting in a warehouse for years. It had been used. Recently, I put it on the dock railing and went inside. I didn't mention it to anyone. What was I going to say? Hey, there's a kid's shoe out there. Does anybody know why? They'd have looked at me the way you look at someone who just broke the rules. And the rules were clear. You don't look. You don't ask. You drive. I stopped looking at the manifest after that. Started avoiding the warehouse staff, the loaders, anyone who might see my face and know what I was carrying. I felt like a ghost in that yard, moving through it without touching anything, signing papers without reading them, picking up loads without checking what was in the route code. I was part of the machine and I knew it, and I kept showing up because the money was good and the alternative was knowing what I'd been part of. During a walk around on my next container, I saw a mark painted on the floor inside. Small. Hand-painted with what looked like white chalk. A bird with its wings clipped. Just the outline, simple, like a symbol someone had drawn fast. Too intentional to be a scratch or a stain. Someone had put it there on purpose. I closed the seal gap. I drove. A few days after that, I was in the yard office getting my next route when one of the supervisors came in. Tall guy, quiet, always wore the same black polo. He leaned on the counter and looked at my manifest, then looked at me, then he looked at my hands. I was jingling my keys without realizing it. Some loads are better left entirely unconsidered, he said. He didn't say it like a threat. He said it the way you'd tell someone to close a window before it rains. Helpful. Mild, like he was doing me a favor. I stopped jingling my keys. He walked out. I pulled into a rest area outside Pahrump about 2 in the morning. I'd been driving for 5 hours and I couldn't keep going. Not because I was tired, because I could hear that thumping again, soft, behind the cab wall, and I couldn't listen to it for 1 more mile. My keys were jangling in my hand and I couldn't stop them. The sound of the brass on brass, that clicking over and over. I had a bolt cutter in the toolbox under the cab. The kind I'm not supposed to have. The kind every long-haul driver carries because seals break and you need to get to your load sometimes. I cut the seal. The bolt snapped and the sound it made was the same sound my keys make, that brass click, and my hand went to my belt on reflex. The doors swung open and the smell hit me first. Cold. Stagnant. Not the smell of cargo or equipment or anything industrial. The smell of a closed space where air hasn't moved in a long time. Like opening a room that's been shut for years. I climbed in with my flashlight. There was nothing. No cargo. No equipment. No crates. Just the metal floor and the walls and a pile in the far corner. I walked over and shined the light on it. Glasses. A woman's glasses with one arm bent. A wedding ring, thin gold, scratched. A child's stuffed rabbit, gray, missing an ear. A man's wallet, empty, the leather cracked. A few pieces of jewelry. A small wooden toy that looked handmade. A folded handkerchief with initials embroidered on it. Personal things. Things that belong to people. Things people would never leave behind on purpose. I stood there in the trailer and the flashlight was shaking in my hand because my hand was shaking and I understood what I was looking at. Not fully. Not in a way I could have explained to a cop or a reporter. But in the way that matters. In the way that sits in your chest and doesn't leave. I was carrying the things that people carry when they don't expect to come back. I closed the trailer doors. I didn't reseal them. I drove the truck back to the Henderson yard, parked it in the spot where I'd picked it up, unhooked, walked into the office, and signed my resignation on the clipboard they keep for haul completion forms. Wrote, resigning effective immediately, in the notes field. The kid at the desk didn't even look up. I drove my personal car home. I didn't go back. I didn't call anyone. I didn't call the police. I know how that sounds. I know. But I was 53 years old and I'd been part of that operation for years, and I didn't know where to start explaining what I didn't fully understand myself. Who would believe me? What would I even say? I found some belongings in a trailer? That's not evidence of anything. That's just stuff. I moved to a small town in the California mountains. Gave away the money. All of it. Every dollar I made from those runs, I gave it to charities and shelters and people who needed it more than I did. I know that doesn't fix anything. You can't pay back a cost you can't even calculate. I can't look at a shipping container now without counting the welds. Looking for patches. Looking for fresh metal. And I keep the lights on in my house every single night. I leave them on. I can't sleep in the dark anymore. The dark sounds like that trailer. Cold and still and full of things that used to belong to someone. I never saw who was in those containers. I never saw a face. Never heard a voice. Never found a name. I found belongings. I found a child's shoe. I found a symbol. I found the absence of people where people should have been. I don't know if that makes me less responsible. I don't know if not seeing them means they weren't there. And I don't know if the operation is still running, if those containers are still moving through that yard outside Henderson, if there's another driver right now listening to a tapping sound behind the cab wall and telling themselves it's just the metal expanding. I think about that a lot. Every time I hear a truck on the highway near my house, I count how long the engine sound lasts. The ones hauling containers take longer to pass. This third account is from a young man who inherited a cabin in the Ruby Mountains, and the things someone left behind for him to find. Story 3. The cabin had been empty for 10 years before I moved in, and I think that's the part one kept getting wrong. I kept treating it like a place that had been waiting, like it was holding its breath for someone to come back. But that's not what empty places do. Empty places just sit there. They don't wait for anything. I need to back up. My uncle died in the spring and left me a cabin outside Elko, up in the Ruby Mountains. I'd met the man maybe 4 times in my life. He was my mother's brother and they hadn't spoken in years, and then a lawyer called and said the property was mine if I wanted it. I didn't have a lot of options at the time. I'd lost my last trucking job, couldn't make rent in Reno, and the cabin was paid off. Free place to live. I took it. The drive up was long. Dirt road for the last 6 miles, winding through pines that got thicker the higher you climbed. The air was different up there. Thin and dry, and it smelled like dust and old pine, the kind of smell that gets into the wood of a house and never leaves. When I opened the front door for the first time, the wind came through the window frames and made this low howling sound, like the cabin was tuning itself. I told myself that was just old houses. Old houses make sounds. I was wearing my grandfather's belt buckle. Western style, faded silver, he gave it to me when I was 16. I rub it with my thumb when I'm trying to settle myself down. I was rubbing it a lot that first day. The cabin was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a den, a bathroom that still had the same pink tile from whenever it was built. And one thing I noticed right away but didn't think much of at the time. Every window in the cabin faced the mountains. Every single one. The road behind the cabin, the only road in or out, had no window pointed at it. It was like the cabin had been built to look at the mountains and nothing else. To not see what was coming. The furniture was what you'd expect. Old. covered in dust. Mouse droppings in the kitchen drawers. I spent the first week just cleaning, hauling out trash, opening windows to air the place out. Felt like work. Good work. The kind that keeps your hands busy and your head quiet. I found the first things on day 3. I was pulling up the carpet in the guest bedroom because it smelled like mildew and I figured I'd just live with the wood floors underneath. Under the carpet, between the floorboards, there was a gap where 2 boards had warped apart. Stuffed inside the gap were a hairbrush, a wedding ring, and a pair of glasses. Not old things. Not dusty or tarnished or falling apart. The hairbrush had long brown hair still caught in the bristles. The ring was gold, plain, a little worn but not antique. The glasses were modern frames, the kind you'd buy at a chain store in a mall. I sat on the floor and looked at them for a while. Then I told myself the obvious thing. Previous tenants. People who lived here before my uncle, before the cabin went empty. They left things behind, the things fell between the boards, and that was that. People leave things in houses. I've left things in houses. A coffee maker in a place I rented in Sparks. A box of tapes in an apartment in Carson City. It happens. I put the items in a shoebox and set it on the kitchen counter. I kept pulling up the carpet. The watch was in the kitchen vent. I was cleaning the vent cover above the stove and it was sitting inside the duct opening. A man's watch, brown leather band. The crystal cracked but the face still readable. The battery was dead but it wasn't an old watch. The style was current. You'd see it in a department store right now. I put it in the shoebox with the others. The driver's license was under the rug in the hallway. I moved the runner to sweep and it was just lying there, face up like someone had placed it deliberately. A man, mid-30s, short brown hair. I looked at the address on it. Local. Elko County. The expiration date was 2 years away. The keys were in the medicine cabinet. A small set, 3 keys on a ring, the kind you'd use for a house or a storage unit. They looked new. I lined everything up on the kitchen counter. The hairbrush, the ring, the glasses, the watch, the license, the keys. And I looked at them and I realized something I'd been avoiding. All of these things were recent. Not years old. Not decades. The glasses were a current style. The license expired 2 years from now, which meant it was issued recently. The watch was current. The keys looked new. None of these things were from 10 years ago or 20, or however long ago someone might have lived here before my uncle. The cabin had been empty for a decade. No one had lived here. My uncle hadn't visited in years, according to the lawyer. So how were these things getting in? I told myself there had to be an explanation I wasn't seeing. Maybe my uncle had been there more recently than anyone knew. Maybe he'd had visitors. Maybe he'd stored someone's belongings. Maybe the place had been broken into and squatters had left things behind. These were all reasonable explanations. I told myself each one of them. I told myself all of them. I rubbed my belt buckle and I stood in the kitchen looking at those items and I told myself every reasonable thing I could think of. Then I stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. I don't know why. I didn't make a decision about it. I just started falling asleep at the kitchen table with the light on, and one night I didn't get up and go to the bedroom, and that became the pattern. The kitchen felt better. The kitchen felt like a room where I could see all the corners. I started keeping a map. Not on purpose. I had a notepad and I started writing down where I found things, just to keep track. The hairbrush and ring and glasses were in the guest bedroom, north wall. The watch was in the kitchen vent, about 10 feet south. The license was in the hallway, another 8 feet south. The keys were in the bathroom, south wall. I drew it out one night, just dots on a rough floor plan, and I sat there looking at it. The dots formed a line. Not a scattered pattern. Not random. A line, running north to south through the cabin, ending at the wall between the bathroom and the den. I went to that wall. I knocked on it. It sounded hollow. Every other wall in the cabin was solid. I'd been cleaning them, patching cracks, painting over water stains. This one wall, the one the line of objects led to, sounded different. Like there was space behind it. I moved the bookshelf that was against that wall. It was heavy, old oak, and I had to brace my feet and push. Behind it, the wall was different. Newer wood. The paneling didn't match the rest of the room. Someone had put this wall in after the cabin was built, and they'd put a bookshelf in front of it. There was a door. Not a full door. A panel cut into the wall with a simple latch. It wasn't on the blueprints I'd gotten from the county. I checked. I put my ear against the panel. There was a sound. Faint. Rhythmic. Ticking like a clock. Steady and slow and coming from behind the wood. I went back to the kitchen. I picked up the driver's license. I'd looked at it before, but I'd been looking at the address, the date, whether it was real. I hadn't really looked at the face. The man in the photo was mid-30s. Short brown hair. Clean shaven. He looked like the kind of guy you'd pass in a grocery store and never think about twice. And then I read the name on the card. It was my name. My name. My first name and my last name, printed on a Nevada driver's license for a man who was not me. With an expiration date 2 years from now, found under the rug in a cabin that had been empty for 10 years. I set the license down on the counter, and the ticking behind the wall stopped. Exactly when I picked it up, the ticking stopped. Like something behind that panel knew I was holding it. Like it had been waiting for me to see the name. I stood in the kitchen. The light was on. The wind was howling through the window frames. And the silence behind that wall was worse than the ticking had been. I know what you're thinking. I should have opened the panel. I should have looked. And maybe you're right. Maybe behind that wall there was a storage space or a crawl space or an explanation for everything that would have made it all make sense. But I also know what I found, and I know what my name looked like on someone else's license, and I know that the ticking stopped when I touched it. I packed in about 10 minutes. My wallet, my phone, the keys to my truck, a jacket. I left everything else. The shoebox. The notepad with the map. My clothes. My food. I walked out the front door, got in my truck, and drove down the dirt road without looking back at the cabin in the mirror. I sold the property to a land developer out of Salt Lake. Didn't use a realtor. Didn't set foot on the grounds. He offered me a number and I took it, whatever it was. I didn't care. I just wanted it to not be mine anymore. I live in an apartment now. New construction. Plain walls. I know what's behind every wall because there's nothing behind them. No hollow spots. No panels. No doors that aren't on the blueprints. I keep the belt buckle. I still rub it when I can't settle. But I stopped wondering about the cabin a long time ago. Or I tried to. The thing I can't stop wondering about is simpler than what was behind the wall. Every item I found in that cabin was personal. They belonged to someone. The hairbrush had someone's hair in it. The ring was someone's wedding ring. And the license had my name on it. Someone else's face, my name. Someone went to a DMV in Elko County with my name printed on their paperwork. They sat for a photo, and they walked out with a card that had my name and their face on it. And that card ended up in a cabin that had been empty for 10 years, waiting under a rug for someone with my name to come along and find it. This next one comes from a kid who was 3 days into a job at a motel off I-80, and the guest who wasn't supposed to be there. Story 4. The phone was ringing and the light on the console said room 104. I stared at it. The light blinked in time with the ring, steady, and I could see the key cards for 104 sitting right there in my drawer, in the slot where they'd been all night, because I checked that room out as vacant at the start of my shift. I'd done the walk around myself. Bed made, TV off, bathroom clear, door locked. I'd logged it in the system. Vacant, clean, ready. The phone kept ringing. I picked it up. Somebody was on the other end. Somebody was breathing. Heavy, slow, deliberate breaths, the kind that fill the receiver and press against your ear. No voice, no background noise. Just breathing and the faint hum of a phone line that shouldn't have been active. I set the receiver down. The light stopped blinking. That was my third night on the job. Let me back up. I was 22, working as a night manager at a motel off I-80 just outside Winnemucca. Not a big place. 2 floors, 40 rooms, an outdoor pool that hadn't been opened since the Bush administration. The kind of motel that gets truckers and people who started driving and realized they couldn't make it to the next city. I'd been at the job 3 days. 3 nights, technically. I worked 11 to 7, the graveyard shift, just me and the cameras and whatever came in off the highway. I took the job because I needed something quiet. I'd been bouncing between warehouse work and retail for a couple years, and I wanted something where I could just be alone and do my tasks. Check people in. Run the system. Keep the log. It's not complicated. They trained me for 2 days, and then the regular night guy went to a different property and I was on my own. The motel smelled like stale bleach and something heavier underneath it, some chemical cleaner they used on the carpets that never fully dissipated. The smell was strongest in the hallways, where the AC didn't reach as well, and the ice machine at the end of the first-floor corridor clicked every 10 minutes. I timed it, not on purpose, but when you're alone in a place like that for 8 hours, you start counting things without deciding to. The click became a kind of clock for me. Every room had the same furniture, same bed frame, same nightstand, same lamp. But the paintings on the walls were all hung slightly crooked. Every single one. Not the same direction, not the same angle. Just off. I noticed it on my first walk around and I straightened one of them, and the next night it was crooked again. I straightened it again. The third night it was crooked again. I stopped straightening them. I had a laminated photo of my dog in my wallet. His name's Cooper. He's a golden retriever. And he's the only thing from home I brought with me. When things felt off, I'd take the photo out and look at it. Remind myself that there was a world outside the fluorescent lights and the bleach smell. Earlier that night, before the phone call, I'd seen a man near the vending machines. Tan jacket, jeans, average build. He was just standing there, not buying anything, looking at the machine like he was reading the labels. I noticed him on the camera feed and figured he was a guest from one of the rooms. I didn't check which one. I should have. That's the kind of thing you learn to do after a few months, not after 3 days. After the phone call, I pulled up the reservation system. Room 104 showed as vacant. No guest assigned. No key card activated. The system was digital, fairly new, and it had a known glitch where it would occasionally show an occupied room as empty or vice versa. The day manager had mentioned it during training. It happens, she said. Just cross-reference with the physical key cards. If the cards are in the drawer, the room is empty. The cards were in the drawer. The room was empty. The phone shouldn't have been able to ring from that room because the phone system was tied to the key card activation. No active card, no active phone line. That's how it worked. I knew that because I'd been trained on it. But it rang. I told myself it was the glitch. The system showed the room as vacant, but maybe the phone line was still active from a previous guest and hadn't been deactivated properly. Old system residue. A technical error. I made a note in the log and went back to watching the cameras. An hour later, it rang again. Same room. Same breathing. This time, I listened longer. About 30 seconds. The breathing was the same, heavy and measured, but there was something else underneath it. A sound I couldn't place. Rhythmic. Soft. Like someone tapping a pen on a surface or dragging a fingernail across paper. I hung up. I pulled my wallet out and looked at Cooper's photo for a few seconds. Then I decided to go check the room. I know what you're probably thinking. Don't go. Stay at the desk. Call someone. But when you're the night manager and you're 3 days in and the system says one thing and reality says another, you go check. That's the job. You can't sit at a desk for 8 hours wondering what's in a room and not look. I took the master key card and the flashlight from behind the desk. The hallway was dark because we kept the first-floor corridor lights off after midnight to save on the power bill. I walked down the stairs and the smell got stronger, the bleach and the chemical carpet cleaner, thick enough to taste. The ice machine clicked as I passed it. I counted. 10 minutes since the last one. Room 104 was at the end of the corridor. The door was closed. I slid the MasterCard through the reader. The light on the lock went green and the door clicked open. Unlocked. Which it shouldn't have been, because the room was vacant and the lock should have been in deadbolt mode. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Bed made, same as when I checked it earlier. No luggage. No personal items. No sign of anyone. The television was on. Volume at maximum. Static. Not a channel. Not a program. Just white noise blasting at a volume that filled the room and bled out into the hallway. The remote was on the nightstand. Untouched. I stood in the doorway for a second. My ears were ringing from the volume. I walked in and reached for the remote. That's when I saw the notebook. It was on the nightstand next to the remote. A composition notebook, black and white marbled cover, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $2. It was open to a page about halfway through. I picked it up. The page was filled with handwriting. Small, neat, tight, written in blue ink. And as I read it, my hands started doing something I couldn't control. They started shaking. The entry was dated. That night's date. It described my shift in detail. What time I arrived. What I did when I got to the desk. Which camera feeds I checked first. The moment I saw the man at the vending machines on the monitor. The note said I'd seen him but hadn't checked which room he was in. That was accurate. I hadn't told anyone that. I'd barely thought it myself. I flipped back a page. Another entry. The night before. Dated. It described my second shift. What I ate from the break room fridge. The exact time I used the restroom. How long I was away from the desk. The license plate of a guest who checked in at 1 in the morning. I flipped back further. More entries. Every night I'd worked. 3 of them. Then I flipped back further. More entries. For more. 7 entries total. 7 nights. I'd only worked 3 nights. The ice machine stopped. I noticed it the way you notice a sound is gone, not the way you notice a sound is there. The clicking that had been every 10 minutes, that steady rhythm I'd been counting all night, it just stopped. The silence in the room was total. Just the static from the TV and nothing else. I turned around. The man in the tan jacket was standing in the bathroom doorway. He was average height, average build, the kind of person you'd never pick out of a crowd. Tan jacket, jeans, same as the camera feed. His hands were at his sides. His right hand was holding a pen. A standard ballpoint, blue, the cap off. His face was blank. Not angry, not scared, not amused. Blank. The way a face looks when it's not performing for anyone. He looked at me the way you look at a wall. I was holding the notebook in one hand and the flashlight in the other. My training didn't cover this. My training covered check-ins and system glitches and what to do if a guest complained about noise. My training did not cover a man in a bathroom with a notebook full of my movements. I set the notebook down. I reached behind me and grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall by the door. I held it in front of me with both hands. He looked at me. He looked at the fire extinguisher. He sighed. The way a teacher sighs when a student gives the wrong answer for the 3rd time. Not frustrated. Just tired. Then he walked past me. Through the door, into the hallway and out the exit at the end of the corridor. I watched him go. He didn't rush. He walked at a normal pace, hands at his sides, the pen still in his right hand. And as he passed through the light from the parking lot, I could see his hands. Both of them, not just the one holding the pen. They were covered in blue ink. Stained from the fingertips to the wrist, the same blue as the ink in the notebook. The ice machine clicked back on. I locked the front doors. Both of them, the deadbolt and the chain. I called the police from the desk phone and I stayed behind the counter, behind the reinforced panel that was there in case of robberies, until they showed up about 40 minutes later. They checked the room. The notebook was gone. The TV was off. The remote was on the nightstand, same position. The room looked exactly like a vacant room should look. They checked the cameras. The man in the tan jacket didn't appear on any of the feeds. Not at the vending machines, not in the hallway, not in the parking lot. I'd seen him on the monitor earlier. I was sure of it. But the footage showed nothing. They took my statement. They asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't. They asked if I'd been sleeping. I had. They asked if I wanted to file a report and I said yes. And they wrote something down on a form and left. I quit the next morning. I drove back to my parents' house and I haven't worked a night shift since. I still check the locks on my front door. Not once. Not twice. 5 times. Every night. I know that's not normal. I know it's a thing I do because of that motel. But knowing why doesn't make me stop. The notebook had 7 entries. I'd been on the job 3 days. The last story in this video is the one I keep coming back to. Story 5. The trail was overgrown and the birds were gone. That's not a thing you notice when you're walking in the woods, usually. You notice when a bird calls or when a branch snaps or when something moves. You don't notice the absence of sound. But I'd been working these forests for 6 years, and I'd walked this particular trail maybe 40 times, and the birds were always there. Chickadees, jays, sometimes a hawk circling overhead. The woods around Austin are dry and sparse compared to the coastal ranges, but they're never silent. That day they were silent. I remember thinking that, and then thinking it was probably just the time of year. Late season. Birds moved on. It happens. I should have paid more attention to that silence. But I was thinking about my sister. My name is Tessie. I'm a forestry contractor. I survey trail conditions for the Forest Service, mostly in the Humboldt Toiyabe, which is the biggest national forest in the lower 48 and covers most of the state. It's lonely work. I drive to a trailhead, hike in, document erosion and down trees and whatever else needs logging, and hike out. Most days I don't see another person. That suited me fine. After my sister passed, the quiet was the only thing that didn't make me feel worse. I had a dried wildflower tucked into my visor. A small purple thing, pressed flat, from a trip Margie and I took up through the Sierra Nevadas the year before she died. We'd pulled off at a scenic overlook and she'd picked it from the embankment and handed it to me through the window. Something to remember the day by, she said. I kept it in the visor of my truck and I never took it out. Sometimes I'd flip the visor down and look at it when I was parked somewhere, just for a second. The trail I was on that day was about 4 miles in from the nearest Forest Service road, which itself was about 12 miles from the highway outside Austin. Remote. The kind of place where if something happened to you, it would be days before anyone came looking. I carried a radio, but the signal in those mountains is patchy at best. I was about 2 miles in when I saw the truck. It was parked in a clearing off the trail, maybe 30 yards from where the path curved through a stand of dead pines. A pickup, white, with a dented tailgate and a faded sticker on the bumper. I knew that truck. I'd reported the owner a year ago for illegal dumping in this same forest. I'd found a pile of construction debris and household waste shoved down a ravine, tracked the truck through the partial plate I'd noted, and filed a report with the Forest Service. They'd find him. I don't know what came of it after that. And now his truck was sitting in a clearing 4 miles from the nearest road, deep in a section of forest that had no business attracting anyone except maybe a forestry contractor doing a trail survey. I told myself he was scouting, looking for a new place to dump, somewhere more remote, somewhere harder to find. That's what people like that do. They get caught in one spot, they move to another. He was probably just walking the area, looking for a ravine or a wash he could back a trailer up to. Now, anyone who works in the woods alone will tell you that you don't turn around every time you see a parked truck. If I did that, I'd never get any work done. You note it, you stay aware, and you keep going. That's the job. I walked past the truck. The cab was empty. The engine was cold. I checked. No heat coming off the hood. It had been there a while. I kept walking. The trail opened up into another clearing and I stopped to note some erosion on the north bank. I was crouching down to look at a washed-out section when I heard footsteps behind me. I stood up and turned around. He was about 20 feet behind me, walking toward me from the direction of his truck. I recognized him from the photo on the dumping report. Heavyset, sun-weathered, baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. His face had that look that's worse than anger, the look of someone who has decided something and is simply executing the decision. He was carrying a metal pipe, a long one, maybe 3 feet, the kind you'd find at a construction site. He held it at his side, not swinging it, just carrying it, and he was walking toward me at a pace that was steady but not fast, like he had nowhere else to be. My hands went cold. That's the thing I remember most clearly. Not my thoughts, not my heartbeat, just my hands going cold. The blood pulling out of my fingers the way it does when your body starts redirecting everything to your legs. I took a step back. He kept coming. I looked around. The clearing was open on 3 sides, thick brush on the 4th. No cover close enough to reach before he closed the distance. My radio was on my belt, but the signal wouldn't reach out here. I was 4 miles from my truck, 12 miles from the highway, and alone with a man who had a pipe and a reason to be angry at me. I turned to run. That's when the helicopter went over. It came from the south, low and loud, the rotors shaking the air. A search and rescue bird, probably, or a Forest Service patrol. It banked over the ridge above the clearing and the downdraft pushed the brush flat. I could see the pilot's helmet through the windshield. The man stopped. He looked up at the helicopter. Then he looked at me. Then he turned around and walked back into the trees, in the direction of his truck. Not running. Walking. The same steady pace as before. I stood in the clearing and watched him go. My hands were still cold and my legs were shaking, that fine tremor you get after the adrenaline hits and doesn't get used. I watched the helicopter bank again and disappear over the next ridge, the sound fading until it was just the wind again. I told myself it was over. He saw the helicopter, he got spooked, he left. That's what people do when they're caught in the middle of something. They retreat. He'd probably drive off and I'd never see him again. I waited 5 minutes. Then I started walking back toward my truck. The sound of the helicopter was gone. The wind had died down, and the silence in those mountains was so complete that I could hear my own boots on the dirt, one step after another, and nothing else. I came around the bend where the trail cut back toward the clearing where I'd parked, and I saw my truck. All 4 tires were flat. Not just flat, slashed. The sidewalls cut open, long clean cuts, the kind you'd make with a knife. All 4. Every single one. I stopped walking. I stood there on the trail and I looked at my truck and I looked at the 4 flat tires and I understood what had happened. He hadn't been walking toward me to attack me. Or maybe he had, but that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was the tires. He'd slashed them before I ever saw him. Before I was even at that clearing where I'd been crouching down looking at erosion. He'd come out to the trail, found my truck, cut the tires, and then walked in to find me. The pipe wasn't the trap. The pipe was just what he happened to be holding. The trap was the truck. He was making sure I couldn't leave. And the helicopter had just interrupted his timing. He hadn't retreated because he was scared. He'd retreated because the helicopter was a witness, and he didn't want to be seen. But he was still out here, somewhere in those trees, and I still couldn't drive. I didn't go to the truck. I turned around and walked the other way, off the trail, into the brush. I found a thicket of dead manzanita and sage about 50 yards off the path, and I got down on my stomach in the dirt and I stayed there. I could hear him. Not right away, but after about 20 minutes, I heard footsteps on the trail. Slow. Pacing. He walked past my hiding spot twice. I could see his boots through the branches. Dusty work boots, heavy, stepping slow. He was looking for me. He paced by my truck for hours. I could hear him sometimes, the crunch of gravel, a door opening and closing. He checked the cab of my truck. He looked in the bed. He walked the trail in both directions. Then he'd come back and sit in his own truck with the engine running for a while, then get out and pace again. I lay in the dirt and the sage and I didn't move. The smell of dry sage and dead wood was all around me, thick and dusty, and I pressed my face into the crook of my arm and breathed through my sleeve so he wouldn't hear me. The night was long and cold and I didn't sleep. I lay there and I listened to him pace and I thought about Margie and the wildflower in my visor and how I told myself the quiet of the forest was what I needed. When the sky started getting light, I heard his truck start up and pull away. I waited another 30 minutes after the sound was gone, counting the seconds in my head. Then I got up and I ran. I ran 3 miles to the main road. I didn't take the trail. I went cross-country, through brush and deadfall, and I don't remember feeling any of it. I just ran until I hit the gravel, and then I ran on the gravel until a patrol car came around the bend and I flagged it down. I collapsed in the gravel on the shoulder. The trooper thought I'd been in an accident. I guess I had been. They found my truck where I'd left it. For flat tires, the cuts confirmed as knife marks. His truck was gone. They ran the plate and it came back registered to the man I'd reported. They went to his address. He wasn't there. I don't know if they ever found him. The trooper who took my statement said they'd follow up, but I never heard anything back. I stopped working in the field after that. I took a desk job with the Forest Service processing permits, something I can do from an office with 4 walls and a lock on the door. I don't go into the woods anymore. Not for work, not for hikes, not for anything. Margie's memorial is up in the Sierra Nevadas, where we scattered her ashes. I haven't been to visit it since that day. I want to. I think about it every week. But the thought of driving up a forest road and getting out of my truck and being alone in the trees, I can't do it. The grief I used to carry, the quiet sadness that lived in me like weather, it's been replaced by something else, something colder. The feeling of being watched by someone I can't see, in a place where no one can hear me. I keep the wildflower in the visor. I still look at it sometimes. But the thing I can't figure out, the thing that keeps me up, is why he was there. I reported him a year ago. He got fined. That's a reason to be angry, sure. But a pipe and slashed tires and 4 miles of forest and hours of waiting in the dark. That's not anger over a fine. That's something else. That's a man who was already out there, already in those woods for a reason I never understood, and I walked into it. Or maybe I was the reason. Maybe he came back to that forest because of me, and the dumping report was just the start of something I never saw the full shape of. I don't know if he's still out there, in those woods, waiting for someone else to walk down that trail.